Okay, this is going to sound kind of crazy, but hear me out. You know how everyone's always worried about running out of money in retirement? Like, that's the big fear, right? Well, I recently learned something that totally messed with my head. Most people who retire with $1 million, they actually end up dying with like $5 million or more. I'm not even kidding. And it's not because they're some kind of investing wizards or anything. It's literally because they're too scared to spend their own money. Like, they saved all this money and they just sit on it. It's crazy. I mean, we're talking about people just like us, you know? People who did everything that they were supposed to do. They saved religiously, hit their retirement number, and then they get there and they're just like paralyzed or something. I'm Jason, by the way. I actually retired when I was 39, but I've been really getting into this retirement spending stuff because, well, I don't know. It just bothers me seeing how many people are basically robbing themselves of the life that they worked so hard for. Actually, here's something that might blow your mind. The data shows that you're way more likely to end retirement with 5 times your starting money than you are to actually run out. Like, think about that for a second. We're more afraid of going broke than we are of never actually living. So there's this thing, and researchers actually have a fancy name for it. They call it the consumption gap. Basically, it's just a heartbreaking way of saying that most retirees spend way, way less than they could. Way less than their money could actually support. Now, I'm not talking about people who are struggling financially. I'm talking about folks with $700,000, a million, 2 million, just sitting there in their accounts. And they're calling their financial advisor, asking if they can afford a new front door. Yeah, a new front door. 7 figures in the bank. I mean, come on, people. Oh, man. I'll never forget this conversation I had. This guy that I met at the gym, let's call him Tom, I guess. He'd done everything right, you know? Saved like crazy, invested smart, retired at 58 with about, I think he said $4 million. $4 million. And he calls me up, totally stressed out, asking if he can afford to replace his 20-year-old Honda Civic. I had to laugh just a little. Not at him, but at the situation. I mean, $4 million, and he's having panic attacks about replacing his 20-year-old used car. So I'm walking him through the numbers, and his investments alone were making way more money than he was spending. Like, he could have bought a Tesla every couple of months and still been growing his wealth. But here's the part that just totally floored me. He goes, "But Jason, what if I need that money for retirement?" I had to stop him right there. I'm like, "Tom, you are retired. You've been retired for 3 years." That's when it clicked for me. This guy had spent so many decades in savings mode that he literally couldn't flip the switch. In his head, retirement was still some future thing that required hoarding money, not the reality that he was already living in where he'd earned the right to actually enjoy his life. And you know what the problem is? If you're anything like me, you probably built your wealth through delayed gratification, and you got really, really good at not spending money. And that skill was amazing for decades, right? But now it's working against you. Trying to switch from a savings mindset to a spending mindset feels like, I don't know, like rewiring your entire brain or something. When you program yourself for like 40 years to save every penny, giving yourself permission to spend feels wrong. Dangerous even, like you're breaking some sacred rule. And then you add all the uncertainty on top of that. I mean, you don't know how long you're going to live. Healthcare costs are terrifying. The market could crash tomorrow. So you just hoard money like it's the end of the world. And I totally get it. But here's what it costs you. Fewer trips to see the grandkids. That dream vacation that you keep pushing off. The backyard renovation that would actually make you happy. I mean, you're living with constant money anxiety when you've got more than enough. This hits me personally because I've seen what happens when time runs out before money does. I had this neighbor a few years back, Mr. Peterson, super meticulous saver. He had this little notebook where he'd track every expense down to the penny. He was always talking about this trip to Alaska that he and his wife were going to take once they had enough saved up. I mean, they had enough. They had enough for years, but there was always some reason to wait. Market's too volatile. Unexpected house repair. Maybe they should save a little bit more just to be safe. Mrs. Peterson called me last year. Mr. Peterson had a heart attack and passed away at 69. They never made it to Alaska. And she actually emailed me a copy of his notebook. The guy had over $800,000. He could have taken that Alaska trip every single year for the rest of his life. Mrs. Peterson told me that she's planning to go next spring, alone. She kept saying, "Oh, he would have loved this." That's the real cost of waiting for the perfect moment that never comes. Folks, you can't take your bank statement with you, but you sure as heck can take your memories. Real quick, if you want more of this kind of straight talk about retirement stuff, hit subscribe. I don't do fluff, just the real stuff that actually matters. Alright, let me tell you about this research that changes everything. There's this guy, Michael Kitces. He's basically the godfather of financial planning. He did this analysis that'll make your head spin. He looked at a couple with $1 million, a balanced portfolio, and wanting to spend it all down over 30 years. How much could they actually spend? $61,000 a year. That's like a 6.1% withdrawal rate, way higher than the 4% rule that everyone's obsessed with. They wouldn't even touch their main money for the first 17 years. Even in the worst case scenario, lower returns, higher inflation, they could spend $49,000 a year without touching the principal until year 18. But wait, it gets even crazier. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you the data that proves that you're more likely to finish with 5 times your starting money than to run out. Now, this is the part that changes everything. So, Kitces looked at the market data going all the way back to 1870. He asked, what happens to people who withdraw 4% a year from a 60-40 portfolio? In 2/3 of the cases, 2/3, they ended up with double their starting wealth. You're more likely to finish with 5 times your starting money than you are to finish with less than when you started with. Let me repeat that. 5 times more likely to die rich than to run out. So, why does this keep happening? There's 3 reasons people basically underspend themselves into misery. The first is fear. We're making gut decisions instead of looking at the actual data. When you just go with your feelings, that loss aversion thing kicks in hard. And every time you withdraw money, it feels like you're losing it instead of using it. Second, you've never actually planned how to withdraw the money. Turns out most people just wing it. They save for decades with like surgical precision. Then they stumble into retirement with no real plan for spending. Third, and this might tick some people off, but the financial industry actually encourages underspending. Bigger accounts mean bigger fees for them. I've had friends whose financial advisors told them to spend only 2% a year. 2%! That's basically highway robbery disguised as conservative advice. So, I got a quick question for you. What's the biggest money fear keeping you up at night? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and honestly, these fears are way more common than you think. So, how do we actually fix this? Well, you need 2 things. Purpose and confidence. First, figure out what your money is actually for. Not some generic, comfortable retirement stuff. I'm talking about real things. What experiences actually matter to you? What would you do if you gave yourself permission to spend? And don't just think about it, you have to write it down. Second, create a real spending plan. Not guesswork, not gut feelings, a real strategy that tests your money against every major market crash since 1870. This means building in flexibility, spending more when markets are good, and pulling back when they're rough. Having money set aside for downtimes so that you never have to sell when everything's crashing. And most importantly, you have to review it regularly. This isn't set it and forget it kind of stuff. Your plan needs to change as your life changes. Here's what I've learned from talking with people who've actually figured this stuff out. Once you have a plan based on actual data, the anxiety just melts away. You know exactly what you can spend, you know what to do if the market tanks, and you can sleep better. I want to tell you about Sandy, because her story shows exactly what's possible when you get this right. Sandy reached out to me. She had about $1.2 million saved, and she was totally paralyzed about spending any of it. She'd been living on Social Security and a small pension, letting her entire portfolio just grow untouched. Classic case of that consumption gap thing. We looked over her numbers, and I helped her build a spending plan, showed her the data, tested it against every major market crash since 1929. And the math was solid. She could safely spend $55,000 a year and still probably end up with more money than when she started with. But here's what really changed everything. I told her to start small. I told her, Sandy, pick just one thing that you've been putting off. Just one thing. So she wanted to visit her granddaughter in Australia. She'd been thinking about it for at least 5 years and never did it because, well, international travel is expensive, she said. 3 months later, she sends me this photo from Sydney Harbor. A huge smile on her face, with her granddaughter giving her a big hug. The caption just said, best $8,000 I ever spent. See, that trip, it broke something loose in her head. Not the money part, but the permission part. Now, she's planning more trips, updating her house, and helping her son with his mortgage. Same money, same financial situation, but completely different relationship with it all. And the last time that we talked, she goes, Jason, I finally get it. Money isn't the goal. Life is the goal. Money's just a tool. That's when I knew that she had finally figured it out. Look, you worked your butt off to get here. You saved when other people spent. You made sacrifices. You earned the right to actually enjoy your money. You need to learn that the biggest tragedy isn't running out of money in retirement. It's reaching the end with a pile of cash and a list full of regrets. If this hits home for you, if you're tired of being rich on paper but poor in real life, subscribe to this channel. I'm going to keep having these conversations that other people, they won't have. The uncomfortable truths about money and time and what actually matters. I appreciate you guys listening. Now go figure out what your money is actually for. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.